Welcome back to another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. I know, long time no see. It's been a while, but we wanted to bring you a show here on Monday afternoon, September 2nd, on Labor Day. We are your co-hosts, obviously. That is RJ Schafer. This is Jackson Caudell coming on the heels of what has been a pretty entertaining opening weekend of college football. Last night's game was really good. It didn't have ACC or any Georgia Tech implications, but, if you're just a football fan, I think most people enjoyed watching that game. It was a little different, I think, than most of us thought it'd be. It wasn't the high-flying shootout, a lot of people may have thought, but ACC play does wrap up tonight. I think I'm very interested to see what Florida State, how they rebound, because I know people might not care about or want to talk about rankings, but I do think if Florida State looks good tonight, I do think there is a very good chance Georgia Tech is ranked in tomorrow's AP poll, which I think would be exciting, even though rankings right now don't really hold a ton of weight. But I guess before we get into all that, RJ, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm feeling great, man. Love football. I'm just, I'm a little sad that we're not going to see college football on Sundays anymore. So this was the last weekend to enjoy that.
Totally not a Georgia Tech point or just a football thing in general, but just a quick point I wanted to make. Like, just watching the game last night, I held a different opinion over the years, and I don't know where most people are at with this now. I don't like neutral site games anymore. I just don't. Like, I feel like these games should be played in Baton Rouge or in LA. Like, I just don't love neutral site games anymore, because there are going to be some years, like if you are a top 4 team in the college football playoff rankings, like you don't, like, it's good to get the bye, but you missed the playoff home game. But then you could play 3 consecutive neutral site games, and if you already play some during the season, like, that's like 4 or 5 games that it makes it harder for your fans to be able to see. So I was just like, I used to not mind them so much. I used to kind of think they were cool, when I was younger, and I guess dumber than I am now. But now that I've grown and I'm a little bit more sophisticated, I just don't like neutral site games.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is it can really be a home game for some teams, and a lot of times it is. Like,
yeah, like the Georgia Clemson game, like that is not neutral.
Yeah.
Like that's not like Clemson. Clemson is not far from Atlanta, like super far from Atlanta, but like that's not. I remember when I was in college, a neutral site game. I don't know if you remember this one. The Washington was a top 10 team. They came down to Atlanta for that Chick-fil-A or Aflac kickoff, whatever it is now, and played Auburn, and that was the furthest thing from a neutral site game I've ever seen. It was like 90% Auburn fans there, and it felt like a Auburn home game. So, like, just do away with that. But getting back to the main topic today. So, yesterday, we broke down the Georgia State win, kind of gave an early preview for Syracuse. We're not going to do a deep dive into Syracuse just yet. I'm still kind of formulating my opinions on how I feel about the Orange and how I feel about how these two teams match up. We're going to give you our game preview on Wednesday, and then, of course, an instant reaction on Saturday. But I do want to shout out everybody who has been watching this show, because we give y'all props all the time, but I don't think we really do enough. Like, the Georgia Tech community and the Georgia Tech fans have just been fantastic. We are near 500 subscribers now, and I just from me personally, like, I just really appreciate you guys watching the show. I know RJ does as well. Let's get up to 500 subscribers, and let's just keep climbing. We love doing the show and making Georgia Tech content for you guys, and talking about everything related to the Yellow Jackets. We really appreciate you guys. So just wanted to give you a special shout out. You got anything on that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, like, we love when you guys share the show. Like, I know you got an aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister who's a Yellow Jackets fan, so anywhere we can spread the good word,
And to borrow a phrase from Josh Pate, take your girlfriend's phone or your wife's phone and just subscribe to the show. Like, do it for them. They may not watch the show, but, like, the subscription's worth it. So just we'll take his idea and do it, and hopefully maybe we can apply it to us. But super glad everybody tunes into the show, and the growth we've had over the year. We started this over a year ago, got paired together, and it's been a great ride, and we're looking forward to doing even more. So just wanted to shout out you guys before we get into today's show. So we're not talking about any matchups or anything, but I do think a storyline that has unfolded pretty much since Aiden Burr's kick went in during week 0, and I think continued over this weekend, is the ACC might be wide open. And I want to say might. I know I know there are people that still doubt Miami. I will just say after watching them, I picked them to win the conference at ACC Media Days. They did get my number one vote. I will say if they play up to their level of talent that they showed on Saturday, I do think they could clearly be the best team. I'm not willing to go there yet. I'm just saying they could be. I do think they are the most talented roster in the ACC. So right now I'll say it looks to be wide open because, there's still questions about Miami. Just, we've talked about it a lot just in terms of coaching, but they look pretty good. It could just be Florida stinks. That is a very real possibility that I'm not going to discount. But if Miami does play to their talent level, I do think that they could be a step above everybody else. But for the time being, I will say the ACC looks to be as open as it has in quite a while because, for years, when Jimbo Fisher, at least his early years at Florida State, they kind of dominated things. And then Dabo just, had a chokehold on the ACC for quite a while. But I think we can all agree while Clemson still might be a pretty decent team, they are nowhere near what they were as a program just from 5 or 6 years ago, when they were on the high perch with Alabama. I mean, they were above Georgia at one point for quite a while. They've fallen quite a bit, but I do still think they're an ACC contender. But I guess just from a Georgia Tech perspective is, can they take advantage of it? We've talked at length about the schedule, and I still think that that's going to be a little bit I don't know if obstacle is the right word, but it's the one I'll choose here. But I do think the schedule looks maybe a little bit more manageable than it did a week ago, and we can get into that. But just kind of what are your thoughts on what you've seen from the ACC just through week one? Obviously, we're going to see how Florida State looks tonight because if they don't look good, it might be time to – I don't know if we can consider them a conference title contender right now. Now, if they come out and just wipe Boston College off the map, I still think you have to at least give them some thought. But I guess what are your thoughts on what's transpired so far through the conference through the first week?
I will say not only is the conference wide open, but it kind of feels like anybody can beat anybody. I'm not saying Duke can beat Clemson. I'm saying a lot of the mid-tier teams, I feel like they can be competitive. I feel like there's a lot of really solid teams. I feel like a lot of teams showed what they could do. Some teams disappointed. And it kind of feels like there's a big mesh of teams from number 10 all the way up to number 4. I feel like any of those rankings of teams are really interchangeable. I feel like Miami by far looked the best team. I think Cam Ward looked impressive. He was never worried in the pocket, very collected. Kind of a game we haven't really seen from him. He made one pretty big errant mistake, but you could just chalk that up to being nerves. There's a lot of solid teams this year. I think Georgia Tech has pretty easily put themselves into that conversation. Georgia's obviously a great team. Clemson didn't look great. I'd say just based off of resume, I think Georgia Tech has the first or second best resume. You could argue the best because of the win against Florida State. It's just there's a lot to love right now.
And, I mean, in terms of what they've done, Georgia Tech's been more impressive just because I think Florida State's a much better team than Florida.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I'll say. As good as Miami looked, there is a chance that Florida is just absolute crap. Like, they looked bad Saturday.
And with the schedule, it's possible they end the season with, 2 wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that. This is a Georgia Tech podcast. I would hate to be a Gators podcast right now. So yeah, just going through the results. It's Thursday was alarming a little bit. And that was kind of the first sign. Okay, this could be an interesting conference, and I mean that because going into the fourth quarter, NC State was in some trouble against Western Carolina, and we'll talk about Virginia Tech in just a second. For NC State and Virginia Tech, I feel like we're kind of the preseason darlings of the ACC. The favorable schedule, they got some. In NC State's case, they did some things in the transfer portal, whereas Virginia Tech was just hey, we're bringing almost literally everybody back. Grayson McCall in at quarterback, Duke transfer Jordan Waters in at tailback. You brought Noah Rogers over from Ohio State, a receiver. We lost Peyton Wilson on defense, but our defense is always good. And I did buy into that to a degree. I wasn't quite I saw some people put them in the playoff, some national people, and I'm not doing that. But I thought they'd be pretty good. And again, one thing I want to say before we do get into this anymore, I don't like overreacting to week one. I know it's all we have to go off of, but there are always results from week one. We're going to look back when we get to like November and say, man, how did that happen? And there's a chance we just look back and say, man, NC State's a good team. How did Western Carolina play them close? Or how did Vanderbilt beat Virginia Tech? Like these two teams look good. There's always a chance we say that. But right now that's all we have to go off of. So like I'm going to try to not overreact too much, but back to what I was saying, NC State looked bad. Wake Forest, I don't expect to contend for the conference title, but they for the first half, they were kind of struggling with NCAA. They did pull away, but again, I think they're kind of like a bowl team, nothing more. North Carolina, one, I do want to say I hate it for Max Johnson. Like I hate seeing somebody seasoning like that. Like that kid busts his tail up to over there, and that was a close competitive game. So I hope he has a speedy recovery to get back to for them. But I don't think my opinion of them changed at all. I think their quarterback situation is very flawed. Marion Hampton is really good. Minnesota is horrible on offense. Like Minnesota is flat out horrible on offense. So I don't even buy into the North Carolina's defense is better stuff. Minnesota's terrible offensive football team. But then just through the rest, Duke was unimpressive in a win against Elon. Stanford and Duke are two teams I don't think anybody expects to contend for the conference title. I will say Stanford looked a little feisty Friday night going against TCU. I want to get ahead of this right now. I think Stanford's going to win a couple games that you don't expect them to this year. I think they're a well-coached team. Their talent level is not quite there yet, but I do think they're going to pull a couple of upsets. But then just running through the rest of them, Clemson demolished by Georgia. Miami blows out Florida. Virginia Tech loses to Vanderbilt. I know Louisville looked good. I don't really care because Austin Peay that's just no offense, no disrespect to Louisville. That's just I'm not going to read too much into beating Austin Peay by a bajillion points. Pitt beating Kent State. The thing I'll take away from that is giving up 24 points to Kent State is alarming to me. That should not be happening if you're Pitt. They did win, so kudos to them. Syracuse looked okay at times. They kind of found their footing in the second half, but they also gave up nearly 300 yards to a team that was, in the preseason, SP Plus was rated 133rd projected on offense. So that could be pointing towards a huge day for Georgia Tech on Saturday. Cal struggled with UC Davis. Virginia beat Richmond. Obviously, the Yellow Jackets beat Georgia State. SMU killed Houston Christian, and then we got the game tonight. But the main point being that some of these contenders like NC State and Virginia Tech did not look the part. Tech already has a win against Florida State. Well, TBD on Miami. I just think we've just got to see it consistently from them. But I absolutely, while the schedule is still tough, I absolutely think they can pave a path to the ACC title game. I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm not predicting it or anything. But just the way the conference looks right now, I think they absolutely can do it because, I know I don't think Georgia State's any good. We both said that on the podcast. But I just think coming back and handling business like you did, you're coming back from Ireland. You've struggled in these type of games before, and the game was never in doubt. I know there were some things Georgia State, they could have punched the ball in goal-to-go situations. They missed some opportunities, but, I never was in fear of Georgia Tech blowing that game. But just kind of what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think one thing that'll be crucial for them is finding a lot of wins early because even if they do, make a run at the ACC title, you're going to have to beat Miami or NC State. You're going to have to beat one of those teams. You can't – I don't think you're going to be a two-loss team in the ACC championship this year. I just don't think it's going to happen. But I think there are a lot of teams – I'll point out NC State because they're probably the biggest victim of this. They're a team I think has a slow start, maybe comes through towards the end of the year. They have a big test against Tennessee this week. I think that's when we're really going to see how good they are. Again, I don't know if what the game plan was against Western Carolina, but Concepcion looked great. Jordan Waters looked amazing. So I just think, again, some of these other ACC teams, I think we're kind of in the boat of rough start, strong finish.
Well, it's not just Tennessee. they play Clemson in a couple weeks. Like that's going to be the biggest get off the mat game in the ACC so far. I was like, okay, like I still think Clemson's a contender in the ACC. Like I know they absolutely look terrible on Saturday, but I think compared to the rest of their schedule, I still think they have a good shot at getting to the ACC title game, mainly because of their defense. But that's going to be a really big game early on.
Yeah, I will say past that game though, like they don't play a ranked team after September 21st. Like I'd say their hardest game past that is against Georgia Tech late in the season.
Are you talking NC State?
NC State, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that was one of the reasons they were kind of a pick because after Tennessee, Louisiana Tech, Clemson, but then it's Northern Illinois, Wake Forest, Syracuse, Cal, Stanford, Duke. Yeah, and then you get Georgia Tech and North Carolina in the year. So that game in Atlanta could be really big on that Thursday night.
That could have big like conference implications for both teams.
Yeah, and I just think we got to take it week by week. I think is the big thing. I think it's worthwhile to have this discussion now, just because so many teams disappointed. Because, but again, in non-conference games, like it sounds crazy to say, but Virginia Tech still does have everything in front of them. Like it looks a little bleaker because, like, okay, if you can't beat Vanderbilt, like, okay, which other teams can beat you? But again, sometimes week one results can be a little bit deceiving, but. Yeah, I just think that the race to get to the ACC title game is going to be, I think, a storyline to watch all year long. I mean, okay, here's something. Okay, if you had to rank the top 5 teams in the ACC, how would you do it right now?
See, I don't know based off of what we've seen. I'd probably go Miami first. I feel like that's probably the most undeniable pick. I think it's fair to put Georgia Tech second. Like I don't think
that's what I was going to say. Like I think you probably they've earned it. Like they beat Florida State. They've they look good against Georgia State. And again, I think Georgia State is bad, but I think handling your business after a long road trip and not having the game really in doubt is impressive. Now they're going to be challenged this week against Syracuse. I don't have any doubt about that. But I also think that this is going to be the first real test for Syracuse because my preseason expectations of Ohio were like bottom of the barrel low. And they kind of did some things that maybe should alarm some Syracuse fans. And I think Georgia Tech can take advantage of. But yeah, I mean, like I think it's totally fair. And if you wanted to just base it off who has the best win, I think you could put Tech 1. Look, this is a Georgia Tech podcast. It's going to sound incredibly biased just sitting here saying it. But tell me, like, again, I get Miami looked really good, but it's also a case of maybe Florida just really stinks as well. So if you wanted to just flip-flop those two and put Tech 1 and Miami 2, I would still probably put Clemson 3. Again, I know they lost big to Georgia, but I think they're still an ACC contender. I would probably throw Louisville up there, honestly. Like I'm not going to read just overwhelmingly into it, but they did what they were supposed to do. I think Jeff Brom is one of the two or three best coaches in the entire conference. Like I just think he gets the most out of his offenses, and really, I think they have a really good defense. But we're not really going to know how good they are until they play Georgia Tech in a couple weeks, and what's going to be a massive game for both teams, especially if Tech takes care of business against Syracuse this weekend. And then I don't know what to do. I think those are that's a pretty clear top 4 if you're into that kind of thing. But if you want to keep NC State up there and just chalk it up to, hey, maybe they were looking ahead to Tennessee and they didn't want to really show a lot. I don't know, but SMU looked like crap against Nevada. I don't care what they did this past Saturday. Is Houston Christian an FCS school?
I think they might even be D2. I don't.
Yeah, I don't. I'll be honest,
I didn't know they had a program, to be honest.
Neither did I. So there's just after those 4, there's just a whole lot of question marks, just from what we've seen, and that's just again the topic of the show is just it looks to be open, and we're still dealing with a small sample size. Like I do want to reiterate that we are 1 week into the season. This is a fun talking point, but that teams generally take a jump from week 1 to week 2. Like sometimes week 1s can be the biggest outliers in college football and even in the NFL too. Because it's been I've read so many articles over the past few years just about how weird week 1 is in the NFL, especially if you don't play guys in the preseason, and just kind of how it's a little bit of a, I don't know if learning experience is the right word, but just a little bit of a catching up and, getting your feet under you and then really getting into your season. So I'm kind of interested to see which teams look a lot better, because we could look really stupid if NC State beats Tennessee, and then it's okay. NC State might have the best win of the year so far, and then it's, I was going to say Miami struggles, but they play FAMU this weekend, so that Miami's probably not going to struggle for a little bit. So there's some teams that could still, look the part. Let's see what happens, in the coming weeks and in the coming month. We're really going to have a good picture of everything at the end of the month, I think. Tech will have played Syracuse and Louisville. After that, they could be 3-0 in the conference and really be sitting in the driver's. Yeah, I guess I could say the driver's seat for a possible ACC title game bid. But again, it's September 2nd. So anything you want to add there?
Yeah, the one thing I will say is we were talking about our top 5. I think 3 through 5 really is totally open, because I think you could argue Louisville at 3. I don't know how you're going to feel about Clemson. I do think the Clemson defense was great. I just don't know, honestly, how much I believe in.
Compared to the teams on their schedule and who they play, they're not going to play anybody like Georgia the rest of the year.
Yeah,
close. They don't play Miami. If their defense remains this good, like we all saw Florida State's offense a couple weeks ago, and we'll see it again tonight. So maybe Florida State can get better on that side, but I don't know how much Florida State can score on Clemson. NC State, I mean, they we've talked about them enough. I think they looked bad the other night. They play Clemson here in a couple weeks. They do play Louisville and Virginia Tech. The Louisville matchup I think could be kind of fascinating, but just relative to their schedule, I still think Clemson has a better unit than most, and they avoid Miami. So,
and I will say you brought up this point too, all of the preseason media sleepers for the ACC, none of them looked amazing. I would say NC State underperformed.
Do you consider Miami, I guess you said sleeper, because I was going to say Miami was voted top 3, and I guess, they do get a lot of love each offseason. So, but yeah, NC State and Virginia Tech were the two teams people would not shut up about.
Do you think, is it crazy to say that Preston Stone isn't the guy at quarterback? Because I feel like
I never thought Preston Stone was that good to begin with.
Because I think Kevin Jennings, when they have him in at SMU, I think he's more athletic. I feel like he has more poise in the pocket. I think it's possible he's the starter, because again, I'm not putting too much stake in the Houston Christian game. He looked better in week 0. He kind of looked better this week. I don't know how to feel about SMU if Preston Stone is not living up to the expectations he had.
Well, if you thought he wasn't good in the first place, like I did, your expectations weren't very high, because one of my biggest pet peeves through this whole offseason was people bringing up the PFF grades and things like that, and how good SMU's defense was and all this. Go back and look at who they played and their conference, and they played a ton of backup quarterbacks, and the American Athletic Conference was awful last year. Whenever SMU played anybody, they did not look good. That's why I just was not high on them coming in and having an 8.5 win total in their first year in the ACC and everything. And then they looked like crap against Nevada. And the Preston Stone point is just right off that is, he go back at the games he graded really high on and those games that are propping him up, and go look at who he played and then get back to me. So I've just never thought he was all that great in the first place. I hear a lot about how they took a lot of ACC transfers and, they hit the portal hard. Yes, they got a lot of backups from the Manny Diaz era Miami Hurricanes. That is not – I'm just not going to go over the moon about that. So I'm still very pessimistic about SMU. I think they're a decent team. I do not think they're an ACC title contender. I think if they played Clemson, I think Georgia Tech would smoke SMU, to be honest with you. I don't think that – I think they would just be way more physical than them.
Yeah, I think honestly, if they played that game, Georgia Tech could open close to double-digit favorites. I just don't see that game being very close.
and I could be wrong. I'm not an odds maker. Just based
Yeah.
off what I've seen and just my evaluation of them preseason, I think Georgia Tech would smoke SMU if they played them, but they don't play them, so what I'm saying doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to kind of recap it all. I know it feels like maybe we were a little bit all over the place a little bit there, but I just kind of wanted to give like an overview of the ACC and just how it appears to be wide open, for teams to get there. After week one, we'll see how things carry over. It's going to be fun to do this show week after week, and maybe a lot of these teams bounce back. Obviously, we'll have close eyes on how Georgia Tech looks against Syracuse if they can continue going, how NC State looks against Tennessee, because I try to keep a tab on like all the ACC and like all of Georgia Tech's future opponents, just for obviously like they're going to play them, and see how they are week to week. Like, I could have a very low opinion of NC State by the end of the week. Maybe they bounce back and make it a competitive game. And you're like, okay, this is a team that can still compete in the ACC. They just were sleepwalking against Western Carolina. I'm not going to learn anything about Virginia Tech. They played Marshall. I don't think Marshall's very good, but I also didn't think Vanderbilt was any good. So I will say if Marshall were to keep that game closer, beat them, I will seriously downgrade Virginia Tech again. Like, I've already had to mark them down a pretty good bit after that loss, but like, if they come out and dominate, it really doesn't change my opinion of them. But like, if Marshall keeps that game close or even wins it, that is not good news in Blacksburg. Clemson, they should roll App State. I know App State's kind of a sleeper pick for people to make the playoff. There's just two different teams, two just very different teams. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of interesting storylines to follow as ACC goes along, and it does. As far as Georgia Tech goes, I think a good reference point will be how Florida State looks tonight, because I think if Florida State were to come out and smoke Boston College, I think you got to feel really good about that week 0 win and how you played and how you looked, and then get ready for Syracuse, because I will be. Brent Key is talking to the media tomorrow. I will be at practice early in the morning. I will get to see them, so I'm intrigued to see that. We get to see him on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Brent Key has his second press conference of the week on Thursday. I will unfortunately not be at Syracuse. This is the last game. This is the last game I'm going to miss this year. I wasn't able to make the trip to Ireland. I wasn't able to make the trip to Syracuse, but I will be at Louisville. I will be at the rest of the road games and, of course, the home games for the rest of the year. But I'm not going to be able to be at Syracuse because I've never been there before, and that was kind of a place I wanted to visit. It wasn't like high on my bucket list, but it's like I'd kind of like to check Syracuse out,
Yeah, it's a cool ACC environment. I'll say that.
As a college football enthusiast, I just want to check some boxes off. But so that'll be our show today. Unless RJ, you got any thoughts on the All Coast Conference?
I will say, I've been looking at this game, kind of highlighting it for a while. I think people are underestimating Cal's chance against Auburn last year. I know Cal didn't look great. Next week, I mean. I think that game is going to be closer than people think.
The only thing is it's in Auburn, and that's a long trip for Cal. If it was in Cal, like last year, I kind of had that one marked too, because it was a road trip for Auburn, and it was like 10:30 on ESPN on a Saturday. And it's like those games can just always be strange. I don't know. It's just Cal's offense outside of Jaden Knott is just not very good to me. So we'll see.
I will say they travel more than like any other team. Like they were in Cal last week, and then they're in Auburn, back in Cal, to Florida State. Like that's got to be horrible as a team.
Hey, they signed up for it. But yeah, anything else on this?
That's all I got.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you guys. Like I said at the beginning of the show, if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love a subscription. We're close to 500 now. We were just at 400 last week. Like, we are climbing at a really high rate, and it is all like due to you guys. Like, you guys make this show work. We really, really appreciate it. We're hoping to continue and climb and keep making good content for you guys. We really appreciate all the support and all the comments and the feedback as well. We try to read through it as much as we can and try to improve off of it. So if you're watching on YouTube, just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on the video, listen on podcasts, follow us, give us we'd love a 5-star review, but if you think we deserve lower than that, we do understand, and we take that into consideration too. But that's going to do it for this show today. We will be back on Wednesday to do a deeper dive into Syracuse. We will be back again on Saturday afternoon. That's probably what we're shooting for because the game's at noon on Saturday. So we'll be back Saturday afternoon, just kind of giving our instant thoughts, and then we'll of course just start all over again next Monday, and kind of dive deeper into what we hope is a win for Georgia Tech against Syracuse this Saturday. But appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you next time.